Shalom King, Yisrael, Yohanathan Dai, we with you here at the airport at Istanbul International Airport. And I just want to give some final blurbs. Had some problems with my dates and times and everything, and I wanted to have a nice background, but I'm here at the airport. Just some final thoughts about my trip here, and I didn't get the live interview with one of the village sisters I wanted to get because my time I had to fly out was sooner than I thought. But there's an old Swahili saying, and that is, the person who abandons his culture is a slave. Think about that Swahili saying. The person who abandons his culture is a slave. So we need to realize that when we are in Babylon, that's not our true spiritual culture. It is not. And so even though you may have means and resources, that you still enslaved. You just a enslaved person. The chains, instead of the chains being iron, like I showed you in Stone Town, the chains are dollars. And those dollars are stronger chains than iron. To give a brief history here, the Portuguese were the first Europeans to enslave Zanzibar, and they ruled for over 200 years. By the end of the 17th century, the Sultanate of Oman, they took over, along with the Indian Ocean slave market. Then, and Stone Town is the historic center in Zanzibar of the slave trade, which was fueled by slaves and spices. And that was the lifeblood of the economy. But later, the Germans and United Kingdom empires, they took over in the 18th century. And of course, they took over the Indian Ocean slave trade. Then the British Protectorate actually outlawed slavery in 1896, yet it did not officially end. The Sultanate of Zanzibar didn't officially end the practice until 1909. Then I was reading this morning in another site, another resource, that really they continued it into the early 20s, just in a clandestine way. They continued practicing trafficking of souls, of peoples. Your Islamic brothers, your brown brothers. Now the slaves were very affordable during the height of the Indian Ocean slave trade. Every free man had a slave. As a matter of fact, 2/3 of the population in 1850 was enslaved. Now, one of the sites that I got some of this information from, you can find it in Asian and African System of Slavery. The book was published in 1980, University of California Press, pages 77 to 84, to cite some of that information. Now, the Islamic world prioritized female slaves and children. Where here in the transatlantic slave trade, they prioritized the men because they can do more. But the way they saw children and women was that they are driven more easily like sheep. And it's interesting to me how they said like sheep, because all throughout the country I've been seeing goats, cows, and bulls, ducks, chickens, even monkeys, and goats, dogs, cats, but I ain't never seen no sheep. But they saw the women and children slaves as sheep. That's the way they saw them. And continuing on here with some of my notes I took here, I also got some information in a book published in 2023 called Aspects of Colonial Tanzanian History, pages 179 and 180, about these female slaves. And then they're supposed to be for domestic purposes because it's against the Islamic religion to enslave and have multiple wives. But they went around their own, just like the Christianity. So they're two, I guess, enemies of Hebrews. They both went around their own morals to do these things. But most of these women were concubines or prostitutes. And they used their laws to get around that, because it's not Christian or Islamic to do what they do in their slave trades. It's not part of their own Bible and the Quran. It's not a part of that. Yet it was done. It's a difference between being a Hebrew and just being a black person. It's not about that. It's deeper than that. It's more than that. Um, so badly treated were these women slaves. The wives of the husbands, they would treat them so badly, and then the men were castrated and put out to on the farms for clothes. For they farmed clothes, and I love clothes. Now I'm going to be looking at them differently. I try to eat some clothes every day, but cloves, Cloves, and of course the slave trade and spices was the big market, and these men would work hard, but so badly treated were the slaves that it was difficult to gain population. We know in the transatlantic slave trade, we flourished like fish. We flourished, but over here, it was difficult because the mortality rate was over 30%. Very difficult to get. So it really kept the slave trade going long. I said they keep bringing in slaves because they kept on dying, being killed. So it was unlike it was in the West. Okay. Um, so as the tour guide explained, that in those dungeons that I showed you, the slave trade on this side of the continent, the East, though they're less than 1%, very negligible, of those that went across the ocean and to the coast of the Western world. These slaves over here, as a matter of fact, I did some more research. The Bantus, they were hiding on the west, and they are Hebrews. They came to the east, they escaped the slavery over there, and came into the ocean trade over here. As a matter of fact, just randomly, I looked at some old video from like 1915, 1920, maybe even older than that, of showing the whippings that Islamic brothers put on the Hebrews, and those who was able to withstand that, they were the good slaves. I saw this, the process that they went through, that the tour guide explained that they had a vetting process in making their slaves. They wanted the tough ones, and I seen that on. I wish I could. I will try to get that movie, and I will show it to us here on Yahweh for Hebrews and Christians. And I showed you the baptism tub where they baptized the babies, and if the parents did not agree to the baptism, they would just drown the child. I showed you that at the church. Yet you want to go ahead and be a Christian where Christianity spread with slavery, as did Islam. Very cruel. And we know that our Ishmael brothers, they pointed out the interior of Africa to point us out. So we didn't have any allies anywhere on the east of Africa or on the west of Africa. I believe that Yehuda, they are the slaves from eastern portions of Africa, so-called Africa. And I think Israel was from the west. So Yehuda was spread to the four corners of Africa, and Israel was spread to the four corners of the globe, of the earth. That's the way my research is showing me. I know my brother Betsuel does not agree with that. He says it's the opposite. Now this, I call it Swahili a slave language, but they call it a trade language because it's really a language, a mutt of languages of people who had the indigenous peoples of all these eastern nations had a primary language, and then together they put it together. Like Swahili is 15% Arab, but of course it has German and English and Bantu mixed in it. So I call it a slave language because these people came together because of slavery. Portuguese is also, so the language Swahili is from Portuguese, English, German, and Bantu. And of course, Arabian language is mixed into it. And the indigenous people, they had to speak this language to communicate after slavery. So this is where Swahili comes from. And the nations that speak Swahili, Tanzania, of course, Kenya, Mozambique, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Somalia, Congo. Well over 200 million people speak Swahili. All these eastern nations of Africa. I do want to talk a little bit more later about COVID and the history of COVID in this place. It's very interesting, and I'll do that later. But I got a lot of time here at this airport, so until then, y'all Yehonathan Dawid with you here on Yahweh for Hebrews and Christians. Shalom Aleichem. Peace be on you.